Now, we're going to do a little case study here about Kyrsten Sinema. We're going to talk a little bit about her past. We're going to talk about the present, and we're going to talk about her possible future. So let's get ready to dive into it. Now, as you may have heard, Kyrsten Sinema has decided to leave the Democratic Party and to fully become a registered independent. If it was someone else, I would probably say, yeah, go for it. Yeah, do the damn thing. But because it's Kyrsten Sinema, for me, it's just more theatrics with this woman. I don't trust her. I remember where she came from. I see who she is now, and I think I know where she's trying to go. Now, first and foremost, I want to show you a reaction to Kyrsten Sinema deciding to leave. Now, I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out here to Case Study QB. Bernie Sanders was interviewed about Kyrsten Sinema leaving the Democratic Party. I want you to listen to what Bernie Sanders says because, you know, I found some hypocrisy in his statement as well. Listen to this, and then we're going to get into this interview with Kyrsten Sinema because she has decided to respond in a CNN interview. And then we're going to take a look at her past because I want to show you where she came from. Let's get into it.
You are an independent. She is now the third official independent of the U.S. Senate, joining you and Angus King of Maine. What do you think of her decision and also what you just heard in her interview with Jake?
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Senator Sinema. She has her reasons. Donna, I happen to suspect that it's probably a lot to do with politics back in Arizona. I think the Democrats there are not all that enthusiastic about somebody who helped sabotage some of the most important legislation that protects the interests of working families and voting rights and so forth. So I think it really has to do with her political aspirations for the future in Arizona. But for us, I think nothing much has changed in terms of the functioning of the U.S. Senate. The good news is that we now have 51 votes. We'll have a majority on committees. It means that we can go forward and start protecting the interests of working families and deal with the reality that we are increasingly living in an oligarchy where the billionaire class and large corporations control almost every aspect of our country. So I would hope very much that with this new majority, Democrats will sit down and start fighting for the needs of ordinary Americans.
So I want to talk about some of those issues in a second. But first, you were a very important figure on the campaign trail for progressives ahead of the midterms, as you normally are. I'm sure you're going to be campaigning for candidates in 2024. The outgoing Arizona Democratic Party official, one of them says that he expects Democrats will run their own candidate against her. Is that a good idea? Would you support a Democratic opponent against Senator Sinema?
I support progressive candidates all over this country, people who have the guts to take on powerful special interests. I don't know what's going to be happening in Arizona. We'll see who they nominate, but certainly that's something I will take a hard look at.
Does she have the guts to take on powerful special interests?
No, she doesn't. She is a corporate Democrat who has, in fact, along with Senator Manchin, sabotaged enormously important legislation.
What I found to be interesting about that statement from Bernie Sanders, yes, Kyrsten Sinema is definitely corporate to the T. We're going to get into that as well. But it was really interesting when she's asking him, does she have the guts to take on, billionaire interests, to take on those corporate donors, right? What I found to be really interesting, Bernie Sanders says, no, she doesn't. I think that's true. I don't think she does either. But at the end of the day, neither did Bernie Sanders. Because if Bernie Sanders had the guts to take on those corporate interests and those oligarchs as well, Bernie Sanders wouldn't have told you to turn around and vote for the corporate candidates that he ran against in the Democratic primary. If Bernie Sanders has the guts to tell you to take on this corporate interest, he's criticizing Kyrsten Sinema for not having that, but he don't really have it either. Because at the end of the day, he told you 2 times in a row, look, I'm not going to win this thing. Turn around and vote for my candidate who supports corporate interests and who supports those oligarchs. He told you to vote for Hillary Clinton, who takes money from Goldman Sachs. He told you to vote for Joe Biden, who takes money from Big Pharma, who supports the military industrial complex. He told you to vote for the people who do the very thing that he told you to fight against. So let's not, for Bernie, let's not just take Kyrsten Sinema and put her in a category of her own here. You right over there with her, because at the end of the day, you didn't have the guts to do it either. I'm sorry, but it's just the reality of the situation. So I found that to be rather interesting. Rather interesting. Now, let's get into this interview from Kyrsten Sinema, because she has decided to speak out about her decision to leave the Democratic Party. I do have to add this here. Kyrsten Sinema wasn't a Democrat really to begin with. We're going to get into her history in just a second. But take a listen to this interview that she had here with CNN.
You're here to make a significant announcement.
I've registered as an Arizona independent. And I know some people might be a little bit surprised by this, but actually I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, a growing number of Arizonans and people like me just don't feel like we fit neatly into one party's box or the other. And so, like many across the state and the nation, I've decided to leave that partisan process and really just focus on the work that I think matters to Arizona and to our country, which is solving problems and getting things done.
Getting things done for who, though? Because Kyrsten Sinema, she's a hedge fund supporter. I'm going to get into that as well. She's a hedge fund supporter. She was at the Bilderberg meeting this summer with CEOs, hedge fund managers. Why was Kyrsten Sinema invited to that? She was new to the Senate. It's not like she was a legacy senator. It's not like she had been there for 5 or 10 or 15 years. But all of a sudden, she got this invite to this meeting that all these powerful people in the world attend. And she was invited to that. I talked about that story when it happened, because that was something I noticed when I looked at the list of participants and I said, how the hell did Kyrsten Sinema get invited to this meeting unless she's trying to support corporate donors? Now, she's saying here that, she doesn't really align with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. She is an independent. So that's really interesting, because I want you to remember where Kyrsten Sinema came from. Kyrsten Sinema was a part of the Green Party. Now, you may ask yourself, how the hell did she go from the Green Party to the Democratic Party? I believe she sincerely switched to the Democratic Party so that she had a better chance of winning. But she was never really a Democrat to begin with. And I think we all need to remember that. And we're going to take a look at that as well.
So your voting record is pretty capital D Democratic. I mean, your views are generally that of a moderate centrist Democrat. How does leaving the party change how you do your job?
Well, I don't think anything will change about how I do my job. Arizonans sent me to the United States Senate to be an independent voice for our state, and I'll continue doing that. What I think is important about this decision, and
Arizona sent her to be an independent voice for their state, but you ran as a Democrat. You guys see the problem? If they sent you there to be an independent voice, then you should have just ran as an independent.
And this move is that I'll be able to show up to work every day as an independent and not be, stuck into one party's demands of following without thinking. And as we've seen in recent years, both parties have created this kind of requirement or a pull towards the edges that you just unthinkingly support all of one party's viewpoints. It's made it difficult to find folks who are willing to work together and solve problems. Now, as you know, Jake, we've been able to do a lot of bipartisan work over the last couple of years, and I'm incredibly proud of that. And I think it's important for folks across my state and frankly across the country to say, yep, there's someone that's kind of like me, doesn't fit neatly into one box or the other, but is standing up for their values, for what they believe in.
But you already knew that. That's why you were a Green Party member. That's why you were not a Democrat. That's why you were not a Republican, because you already knew that both of those parties had particularly had party ideologies that you didn't really ascribe to, whether it was Democrat or Republican. So you already knew that, Kyrsten Sinema, and then you tried to play the political game where you're like, well, if I really want to win, I'm going to have to join the Democratic Party. But you knew exactly what you were getting into when you chose to leave a third party and go into the two-party system. So I don't buy that from this woman. I think Kyrsten Sinema is an opportunist. I would be careful of her. I think this is someone you really need to keep your eye on for the future, because I think, well, I'm going to tell you what I think later, what I think is going to happen.
Is doing it without trying to get one over on the other party or beat the other guy.
So let's talk about practically what this means, because you're the chair of at least 2 subcommittees. You're a member of a number of important committees, including Veterans Affairs.
So I wanted everybody to hear that she's the chair of a couple of committees. So she was another one, and I pointed this out about Joe Manchin as well. Regardless of them blocking legislation that could pass, right? They're still on committees. She still has committee assignments just like Joe Manchin does. And I said this before, if the Democratic Party was that frustrated with Kyrsten Sinema, why hasn't she been removed from any of these committees? Same thing with Joe Manchin. They keep them on the committees. And that right there lets me know they don't really have a problem with what they're doing.
Does this mean that you're no longer going to be in those positions because you're no longer a Democrat and the Democrats control the Senate?
Well, I intend to maintain my position on my committees and keep doing the work that I've been doing for Arizona. So I don't think that things will change in terms of how I operate or the work that I do in the United States Senate.
So ever since Raphael Warnock, Senator Warnock, was reelected earlier this week, the balance of power right now is 51 Democrats, or 51 votes for the Democratic Party. That includes 2 independents, Angus King of Maine and Bernie Sanders of Vermont. But that's 51-49. What you're doing today doesn't change that? It's still basically going to be 51-49?
Well, I know you have to ask that question, Jake, but that's kind of a DC thing to worry about. What I'm really focused on is just making sure that I'm doing what I think comports with my values and the values of Arizonans. So when I come to work each day, it'll be the same. I'm going to still come to work and hopefully serve on the same committees I've been serving on and continue to work well with my colleagues of both political parties. And I'm not really spending much time worrying about what the mechanics look like for Washington, D.C. And to be honest, Jake, I don't think anyone in Arizona is caring about that either. So I don't think
that should be a big red flag to anyone listening. She's letting you know she's not thinking about that. She's not thinking about whether or not legislation is going to pass or that Democrats put forward is going to pass or not. She's not thinking about that. She just told you.
Things will change much for me, and I don't think things will change much for Arizonans.
It's also an unusual time because the Democrats in Washington feel really good right now. They actually picked up a Senate seat and picked up some governor seats. It's the first time the party that controls the White House actually gained Senate and governor seats since 1934. The wave that was supposed to come, the red wave, didn't actually happen. Kevin McCarthy, or the Republicans, maybe Kevin McCarthy will be the speaker, but either way, the Republicans will control the House, but not with the margins they were expecting. This is going to disappoint a lot of Democrats, and they're also going to feel like they don't understand. Why would you do this at a time when the Democratic Party is having a good week?
Well, I think folks,
because she's not about that life. She is not about that life.
folks at home in Arizona have known me for a very long time, and they know who I am. I've always been someone who is focused on getting results, getting things done, and I've never fit neatly into any party box. I've never really tried. I don't want to, and I think that's reflective of how most Arizonans live. You know, Arizonans who aren't affiliated with either party are often the largest group of voters in Arizona, and even those who are affiliated with parties often find that they don't fit 100% into that box. The reality is that when we get up in the morning, we don't really think about partisanship. Most people don't wake up and think, okay, well, I've got to get this Democratic breakfast on the table. I got to get in my Republican car and go to work. That's not how real life is. I know it is in this town.
People think about their wages, though. people think about, especially those making minimum wage that are still making $7.25 an hour. People get up in the morning and they think about that, and you voted against the minimum wage increase.
But in the rest of the country, people are just living their lives. And so they're not thinking about who's winning and who's losing, but that's what the parties are thinking about, is how do we get one over on this guy? How do we, ensure that we're punishing them? How do we continue to win? And what I'm really focused on, and I think the proof is in the pudding of the work I've done in the Senate, I'm really focused on getting results, like actually solving problems. And so, removing myself from the partisan structure, not only is it true to who I am and how I operate, I also think it'll provide a place of belonging for many folks across the state and the country who also are tired of the partisanship.
We need to be very careful here, because let me tell you what I predict is going to happen. You guys know I'm 100% for third parties and independent candidates, but not this one. Let me tell you what I think is happening. We need to be careful. You see, Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they know the majority of Americans want a third party. They've seen those polls just like we've seen those polls. What I see happening, it seems like people like Kyrsten Sinema, if we're not careful, and Tulsi Gabbard, leaving the Democratic Party. Again, like I said, both parties are crap. But these are not the people that I want as a third party candidate or independent candidate. I don't want a Kyrsten Sinema who is still taking corporate money. I don't want a third party or independent candidate that is not going to support progressive issues, that is not going to be willing to increase the minimum wage. I don't want that. I don't want a third party or independent candidate that is not going to support some type of universal health care in this country. I don't want that. So if we're not careful, what we're going to end up with is a bunch of centrist, independent, and third party candidates who are going to somehow manage to convince people that, look, guys, I'm not a part of the duopoly. The majority of you want a third party or independent candidate. That's what I'm here for. And I'm afraid that some people will fall for it and believe it and think, yay, this is exactly what we want. And they won't pay attention to the positions or the policies. And they'll just think, this is our new third party. This is the way to go. And you'll end up getting the same old, because all you're doing is voting for centrist candidates who were already a part of the duopoly and don't intend to make any type of progressive change. So keep your eye on people like Kyrsten Sinema. Keep your eye on people like Tulsi Gabbard. This is why when I had that discussion with Andrew Yang, I told him, we don't want a third party candidate or independent candidate that's just going to be a centrist. We already have that in the duopoly. That's not what we're looking for. And I honestly believe that someone like her and Tulsi Gabbard, this is exactly what they're trying to do. So I'll be very careful. Be very careful with this. We're going to go just a little bit more, and then I'm going to show you something about her past that I think is important.
There's going to be a lot of noise about this from the Democrats, from progressives, from the left. You know this, that because of your position working with Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia to push back on some of the efforts, the legislative efforts, and change them and moderate them, you've already been a target of the left, and people have been very critical of you. They're going to call you every name in the book after this comes out. They're going to call you a traitor. They're going to call you an ingrate. What are you going to say?
Well, I think I'll do what I always do, Jake, which is keep doing the work that I know is important for my state. You know, I just not worried about folks who may not like this approach. What I am worried about is continuing to do what's right for my state.
Anybody in the chat in Arizona? If you're in the chat and you're in Arizona, please let me know. Is this what you guys want? Is this really what you guys want? What Kyrsten Sinema is advocating for? Let's take a look back. She just told you, by the way, she doesn't care. She's not worried about what other people, she don't care. Sinema looking out for Sinema. Now, why is this important? I think we need to go back and take a look at Kyrsten Sinema's past, because I told you she came from the Green Party. She left the Green Party and went into the Democratic Party because it gave her a better chance to win. Mike said, hell no. There you go. Hell no. But did you know that Kyrsten Sinema grew up poor? Kyrsten Sinema grew up poor. She knows what it's like to struggle growing up in poverty. But she's another example of someone, I told you that just because someone grew up poor, once they get some money, that doesn't mean they still want to help out poor people. And she's a perfect example of that. Let's take a look at who Kyrsten Sinema was. There's some red flags I think we should have noticed early on.
Agree. She worked as a criminal defense attorney and, among other clients, represented an Iraqi refugee who waited for citizenship papers for over 2 years. Representing those on the margins of society would end up being the key driver for her early political career. When George W. Bush took office and U.S. imperialism thrived, Sinema stood out in the red state by protesting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. She organized 15 anti-war rallies by the start of the Iraq War. And then her political journey began. In 2000.
Pause. She was an anti-war activist. What happened to that? Not that way anymore. Now it goes into the piece here where she started to work for Ralph Nader.
Afghanistan and Iraq. She organized 15 anti-war rallies by the start of the Iraq War. And then her political journey began. In 2000, Sinema worked on Ralph Nader's Green Party presidential bid before embarking on her own political journey. In 2001 and 2002, Sinema ran for local offices as an independent. She refused to take campaign contributions. I don't believe in accepting money in exchange for votes. That's bribery.
I don't believe in accepting money in exchange for votes. That's bribery. Well, she sure is accepting a hell of a lot of money now. Someone take a screenshot of that. We're going to ask, what happened to Kyrsten Sinema?
She told the Arizona Republic. She lost both races and then attacked capitalism in a letter. Until the average American realizes that capitalism damages their livelihood while augmenting the livelihoods of the wealthy, the almighty dollar will continue to rule, she wrote.
She was against capitalism. You guys see how far this woman has fallen?
Later, Sinema, the proud owner of more than 100 pairs of shoes, would call herself a Prada socialist. After losing 2 races as an independent, Sinema switched over to the Democratic side and won a House seat representing Arizona's 15th congressional district.
In the grand scheme of compromises, it's not really that big a deal.
Bronco Marchetich, a staff writer at Jacobin magazine, told us.
But what I do find interesting about it, it's like one very tiny step in what would become a series of much bigger kind of leaps to the center after that.
On social issues, Sinema was a glimmer of hope for marginalized folks living in Arizona. She fought against the same-sex marriage ban. She fought for the rights of immigrants. She spoke out about mass incarceration. She fought to include gender identity in anti-discrimination laws. She led a successful effort to kill a ban on affirmative action, and she strongly opposed abortion restrictions.
In Arizona, actually, it's not that easy to be a progressive state legislator because we have a very conservative legislature and a.
Oh, she was a progressive state legislature. You guys hear that? She was a progressive.
Now we have a pretty conservative governor coming in. But I think frankly, the knowledge that if I weren't there fighting, that I'm not sure someone else would be saying those things. That keeps me going and helps me feel like I'm making a difference for the communities that have historically been underserved and marginalized in Arizona.
But somewhere along the way, Sinema seemingly looked at the path of least resistance, taking into account the fact that Arizona had voted for a Democrat president only one time between 1952 and 2016. And it's in this context that her progressive roots seemed to fall by the wayside. One of the earliest indicators of her gradual move to the right came in the form of a book she wrote in 2009 called Unite and Conquer, Marchetich told us.
It basically is about how people can cross the aisle and you can work with people to get things done across the aisle that's sort of the big mark of when she self-consciously rebranded. It's politics. You, of course, have to work with people to get things done. But the thing is, there's a lot of politicians who do that, but don't sort of make a brand out of that.
In 2010, Sinema was elected to the Arizona Senate, and in 2012, she decided to run for a U.S. House seat.
Congress does nothing, or worse, bails out Wall Street and the powerful while we suffer. That's why I'm announcing today that I'm running for Congress. I'll stand up to the powerful in Washington.
Sinema won the race, which made her the first ever openly bisexual member of Congress. But once she got to Washington, her words about making Wall Street pay had seemingly been lost in transit, as her
Does that sound familiar? Once she got to DC, her words about making Wall Street pay, it went away. It went away.
brand was about to take center stage. Sinema immediately went to work helping corporate lobbyists in Wall Street, two groups who were further marginalizing the marginalized communities she claimed she got into politics to protect.
She went on to help corporate Wall Street. Again, she grew up poor. This is how quickly people change when they get to DC. You see why you can't go into the two parties?
Ideological shift persisted as she advanced in political office. She advocated for cutting corporate taxes and regulations, and she approved a partial rollback of the 2010 financial overhaul known as Dodd-Frank. One bill supported by Sinema was literally written by Wall Street. The New York Times expands. In a sign of Wall Street's resurgent influence in Washington, Citigroup's recommendations were reflected in more than 70 lines of the House Committee's 85-line bill. Two crucial paragraphs, prepared by Citigroup in conjunction with other Wall Street banks, were copied nearly word for word. Lawmakers changed two words to make them plural. In 2015, Sinema, the former anti-war activist, bafflingly voted against the Iran nuclear deal, an arms control agreement that even the Pope backed. But that didn't mean much to Sinema, who said, "Yeah, I don't know him." That same year, Sinema voted to prevent the resettlement of Syrian and Iraqi refugees until tighter vetting processes were implemented. And Sinema's departure from everything she once stood for persisted. The Phoenix New Times notes, she introduced legislation aimed at cracking down on the U.S. visa waiver program and was one of only 6 Democrats to vote to punish sanctuary cities.
She, at this point, went against almost everything that she stood for when she was in the House in Arizona. Just like that. Just like that. Went against immigration, was no longer anti-war, apparently. Was no longer against corporate money, apparently. She went against all of it.
And she joined Republicans in passing bills intended to deregulate the banking industry and attack the Affordable Care Act's employer mandate. Sinema also voted in favor of the Make America Secure Appropriations Act, which included $1.6 billion in funding for the border wall. With Trump in office, Sinema voted in line with the stake man half of the time, according to 538. In 2018, Sinema decided to run for Senate. In the midst of her campaign, she once again went to bat for those who needed it most, Wall Street bankers. She voted to support the Crapo banking bill, co-authored by Senate Banking Committee Chair Mike Crapo. The bill undercut regulations and weakened consumer protections, including against discrimination. The New York Times said the bill removes protections for 25 of the top 38 banks, weakens regulations on the biggest players, and encourages them to manipulate regulations for their benefit, and saps consumer protections. With Sinema's help, the bill was signed into law. So why did Sinema, the one-time grassroots progressive activist who vowed to take on the wealthy, instead choose to protect them? The source of her campaign funds could provide a clue. She was one of the largest recipients of campaign money from the banking and finance sectors.
From the banking and finance sectors. That's going to be important when I show you this Bilderberg list. That's going to be important. Remember, banking and finance.
2011 to 2020, Sinema has received over $1.9 million from the securities and investment sector and $422,000 from the commercial banking industry, or contributions she once referred to as bribery just years prior. During her Senate campaign, Sinema raised over $22 million from various PACs, big tech companies, and deep-pocketed donors.
And over the years, I'm proud to say that I have taken the time to learn and grow and occasionally even change my opinion.
Sinema edged out Martha McSally in the U.S. Senate race and was sworn in on January 3, 2019. In the summer of 2020, Sinema's work alongside Republicans did not go unnoticed. She received awards from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for her exemplary leadership and bipartisanship. After Joe Biden took office and the Democrats and Republicans split a 50-50 Senate, Sinema made a move that would have seemingly disappointed her past progressive self very, very much. Sinema, who once doggedly fought for immigrants and refugees as a social worker and attorney, chose to side with Republicans in voting to block undocumented immigrants from receiving stimulus checks.
How do you go from being a social worker to a complete corporate sellout?
And when it came to including the $15 minimum wage in the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package, Sinema told Politico, the minimum wage provision is not appropriate for the reconciliation process. It is not a budget item, and it shouldn't be in there. While Sinema deemed inclusion of the $15 minimum wage in the reconciliation process, which allows passage with 51 votes, or 50 and a tiebreaker from the vice president, inappropriate, she also doesn't believe in ending the filibuster, which calls for 60 votes in order to pass, requiring the support from at least 10 Republicans. Meaning, she seemingly doesn't support increasing minimum wages unless at least 10 Republicans sign on too. So with that, she walked into the Senate chamber, literally gave Mitch McConnell, the self-described Grim Reaper, a pat on the back, and gleefully voted against a livable wage. The move was somewhat surprising, considering Sinema's stance on the minimum wage in 2014, when she tweeted, "A full-time minimum wage earner makes less than $16K a year. This one's a no-brainer. Tell Congress to hashtag raise the wage."
That was 2014 when she tweeted that, you guys.
Had she stuck by this sentiment, a majority of her state would have given her a pat on the back. According to one poll, 61% of Arizonans support raising the minimum wage, and had it advanced, roughly 839,000 workers in Sinema State would have seen a boost in pay.
So the majority of Arizonans, or Arizonians, I don't know what you call you guys, supported the $15 minimum wage increase, which she voted against. But in the interview I just showed you with her and Jake Tapper, she said she's focused on helping Arizonans, helping the people in her state. But if she was really focused on helping the people in her state, she wouldn't have voted against that $15 minimum wage. That's her corporate donors speaking into her ear, telling her to vote it down because they don't want to pay more to the American people. That is what that is about. Kyrsten Sinema is a fraud. She is bought and paid for. And I don't want you guys to buy this independent title that she now has. This woman sold out many years ago.
Folks know in Arizona, I'll always put their interests first, never party.
I realized, oh, if I do this thing where I'm constantly affecting to the right, and I'm counting myself as someone who gets things done, as someone who's moderate, that's worked for me so far, so I'm going to keep doing it, and it did work for her. And there's really no incentive beyond her own political convictions, if she even has any anymore, to abandon that.
Sinema's political transformation may be complete. She's been able to advance her political career through gravitating towards positions that are important to the American people and crossing party lines in a way that is rarely seen in Washington.
Told you we were doing a little case study into Kyrsten Sinema tonight. So what happened to Kyrsten Sinema? And it's people like Kyrsten Sinema, it's people like members of the squad that disappoint a lot of people today, to the point where don't ask me to vote for Democrats or Republicans. Don't ask me to vote for anybody going into the two-party system. Don't ask me to do that. Because she's a perfect example, someone who had these progressive policies and ideas and supported these policies. And once she got into DC, she flipped. Sinema sold out for money. So much to the point that she was invited to the Bilderberg meeting. Now, this was June of this year. Now, I went over this story on my show when it happened, but it was really interesting to me when I started going through the names. And I thought, oh, okay, let's see who's here. CEO of OpenL. Who else do we have? Chairman of Goldman Sachs. Like, this all makes sense to me. The CEO of Shell. That makes sense. But as you scroll down, then all of a sudden I got to the S's and I said to myself, now, why in the hell is Kyrsten Sinema at the Bilderberg meeting? This is a meeting with people who are wealthy elites all over the world. You have the director of the National Security Council, Peter Thiel, was there, who's the president of Thiel Capital LLC. Why would she be there? Why would she be there if she wasn't supporting corporate interest? So what you saw tonight has been the transformation of Kyrsten Sinema. That's what you saw tonight. I'm going to go to some of these comments here in the chat. Bad cookies. Sabby, Kyrsten Sinema was the original identity politics candidate. She used her LGBTQ background to virtue signal. This was back when it was nuanced and not the DNC playbook. Lawrence, Sinema has no loyalty to any party. She has changed parties many times. Carl says Sinema is a registered corporate cash vacuum cleaner. Sebastian, I can't stand any of these politicians' voices. They're all fake. The Gemin, Sabby, do you think you could interview her? Would you? I don't think she would come on here. I don't think she would come on here. I don't even think I would want to interview her, to be honest. Like, that woman is so fake. Hitflix, she grew up poor and decided she was never going back and would do whatever it took. Rick says, watch Yang embrace her doing this. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. I'll take those comments on Rockfin. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. That's the beauty of indie candidates, Sab. They don't fall under an ideology because they are not a party. Forcing voters to educate themselves upon the candidate instead of assuming and being lazy when it comes to research, projecting our beliefs onto a candidate due to an alphabet next to your name. No one ideology that rules us all. Figuring us out, you're better off trying to lasso the wind. Research your politicians. Well said, Roger. Well said.